everyone, welcome back to Psych with Dr. DK. I am excited to be here with you, and tonight we're going to be talking about why healing hurts. Now, I am not someone who uses, well, now I am, but I'm not someone who used to use analogies until I met my husband 5 years ago, and he is an analogy person, and now I speak in analogies. So when I think about healing, specifically emotional healing, and having to kind of go through the counseling process, I think about it as a wound. Now, there's two kind of types of wounds. Sometimes it's a paper cut that doesn't really hurt us. Sometimes you just leave it alone and it heals by itself. And then you have your wound that you should have taken care of it. You should have put antibiotics on it. You should have cleaned it and you didn't. And now it's infected. And now you have to go in and they have to scrape it all out and clean it all out and put all the medicine on it and sew it all up. And then you have to keep watching and keep healing it. That is how emotional healing is. One of the things about counseling is that it can be very hard to go into a room and talk to someone about what you've experienced and gone through. And I think the hardest part about healing is that oftentimes you're doing it on your own. You're doing this alone. And you're having to sort through things that you do know and things that you don't know with someone who wasn't present, so they don't have a bias to what happened, but at the same time too, they have no picture of what really happened unless you tell them. And so healing can get really, really tricky because it really depends on how much you open up. And I've seen within counseling sessions of other people and just hearing people who are like, I've gone to a therapist about this and I've talked about this, and they've really said, like, and I've heard that verbatim someone say, like, I'll deal with it later. And I use air quotes because emotionally they never deal with it. They're like, I'll deal with the issue emotionally at another time. Versus, like, that's kind of like a saying, like, I'm going to put it on the back burner. I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to leave it there. And then they just drop out of counseling. Now, the reason counseling is so good when you have the right therapist is that you're able to work through things and they're able to help you point to different ways of reacting. So there's this thing, if you know, it's called triggers. Now, I have heard people use the word trigger as kind of a, I don't know, blanket statement. It's like saying I love you. Like, I love a burger, I love this restaurant, I love this person, and like it's the same level of love, but not really. When I've heard that word trigger, I've heard that same thing where they're like, oh, that's a trigger to me. Like, and there's levels of triggers. Sometimes there's a bad, like, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth and you're just like, why would you say that? And then there's other times where it actually, which in my definition of a trigger is where it triggers you back to the incident that happened. That's the trigger that a lot of victims of abuse will experience. So if it's like someone touches your arm a certain way or grabs your wrist a certain way, and then all of a sudden you flash back to the moment that it happened. So when you find a good therapist, they're able to kind of help walk you through, like, maybe you're having a really hard time with some friends and you're just like, I'm not understanding why I'm not getting this, or, you know, I'm really struggling when these things happen and I'm reacting this way and I shouldn't react that way. And they're able to walk you through maybe some reasons why. I know for me, my entire life, I have always felt like I couldn't voice my opinion, and that if I did, it was shameful. And I always heard from other people, like, you just shut up, put it under the rug, and move on. Like, don't talk about what you feel. You're bringing shame to me. So for me to speak up and speak out about something, it usually takes a really, really long time. And so when I've struggled in relationships or I've struggled in work environments, I have used a counselor to talk through that. And sometimes it's triggered back to how I feel when I was little. And I start to resort back to like 5-year-old thinking or like 15-year-old Denisha, versus being able to logically look at something and say, I'm not in harm. I'm not in protective mode. This person just said this or did this. You know, I'm not able to, when I'm in my moment, there's times that I'm not able to decipher if it's a safe situation or not, and then I would get anxiety and depression. My anxiety would get really bad to where I would have like shocks going from head to toe, and I would freeze and I would panic, and then I would just a lot of things would happen. And when I would go to counseling, it would actually help me kind of work through these things. But it didn't make it easy, because what had happened was that I would have to deal with the current situation and sometimes some past situations. And it was probably about 19 to 20 that I found, for me, the way that people speak to me can make me feel like I'm either needing to defend myself or not defend myself. So if someone gets aggressive, I'm already like, my fists, you'll see my fists like cringe up next to my side. You'll see me kind of stand up, and like I'll be in a position, like if you're yelling at me and standing, I will stand to be like, look, I can take you. But also I have had to, like, my husband and I have worked on this, because I have a hard time when people are standing and someone's upset. It doesn't matter, like, no one's yelling. It's just like, I'm upset about this. This situation sucks. And I had to ask him to sit down. My husband knows this. Like, if he's upset, like, he has every right to be upset. But I ask that he sits down so that I don't go in defense mode and can't hear him. So I've learned this through time, in a lot of counseling, and a lot of friends who have shared their experience that is something that they have struggled with when they have been abused. Now, when you're going through counseling, the other thing that kind of sucks is you're often going to counseling alone. And the hard part is when you're sharing information to your counselor, they only know your side, honestly, and they only know how much that you tell them, so they do have to kind of make some guesses. They do have to kind of say, okay, my assumption is this based off the way that you're talking. But also too, like, oftentimes when you're working through something, your family is not going to be in your corner. For me, it was very difficult because I wanted to have healing and I wanted to get over what happened to me. But there was a lot of family members who just in general were like, you cannot talk about this because it's shameful for everybody. But it was like really hurting me. And I needed to work through that emotionally because it was emotionally crippling me from being able to have relationships and friendships and even work, to be able to work. So I was like, I need to work on this because I can't let this affect my entire life, or else I'm going to be stagnant and I'm just going to be miserable. And what I have found is that oftentimes when we're going through healing, we are doing it by ourselves. And sometimes what tends to happen on our side is that we go to our family or friends and we're like, oh, well, you should do counseling too. And like, oh, I've been so, like, because you get so excited and like you start to see it working, and you start to, it just comes off the wrong way unintentionally. And it's like, well, I've talked through all of these issues and like, I'm working through this because you're finally feeling free. But then to them, they might be like, okay, like, good for you. So you feel more alone and more isolated because you're kind of just like in your own little world. Now, here's the thing though, when you're, and sometimes counseling can feel really good and you'll have like a really good session and you're like, oh man, I feel so great about that. And then sometimes the counseling session is really hard. And one of the counselors I had, I love this analogy that she told me. She said, healing emotionally is like an onion. If you were to take your time and to really work through things little by little, it's going to still hurt, but it's not going to hurt as much as if you just start throwing things down. And that, like, you have the onion and you, like she goes, basically you're either choosing to cut it with a knife and say, okay, slowly we're going to do this to make sure that I'm walking through these things and I'm taking down bad habits, but also implementing some good ones so that I'm not like drowning emotionally. But then, those are my defense mechanisms, is when I put a wall up and I'm like, this is how I'm going to protect myself. And then all of a sudden I try to throw all those walls down. She's like, you can't do that. You have to have a good defense mechanism put back in its place. So we have to work through things slowly. So then she said, so you either have a knife option or you decide to take the onion and just start ripping it apart with your fingers. And what tends to happen when you rip it apart with your fingers is that the onion just starts to rip layer after layer. There's no clean cuts. It's disgusting. It smells horrible. Your eyes are watering. Everything is a mess because you're just throwing everything to the wall, basically. And so when you try to go through counseling just to be like, well, I heard counseling's good, but I'm not going to really try at it. I'm only going to go a couple times and it hurt really bad to talk about this stuff. And then I'm just going to give up. You're only leaving yourself in a damaged state when you walk out that door and not go back. You are also leaving yourself in a damaged state when you decide to push things under the rug. And what tends to happen is that we look at situations with a different type of lens that isn't healthy. Often we think everyone's a threat, everything's a competition. I know for me, I grew up thinking that everyone was dangerous and that everyone was shady and like there's nobody who's good, everyone's evil and everyone's abusive. Like I just didn't have the right lens. I thought a lot of the things that I went through was normal until I realized it wasn't. And so when I tried to start healing, I would say, I want to talk about this. The counselor asked, like, do you want your mom or your dad to come into a session with you so you can deal with this? And I'm like, my parents would never do that. And here's the reality is when I was 13, we did do a session like that. And both parents had told me I was a liar and that everything going on was my fault. And so this would not have been beneficial at 19 or 20 years old to who I did not have a relationship with either parent at that point, to try to pull them into a room. So I found that I was alone in my healing. And that was really hard because what happens with that is that you lose a lot of people. And you lose a lot of relationships and you have to look at situations honestly. And I know for myself, there was a lot of situations that I could sit there and point the finger at my parents and be like, you guys screwed me up forever. Or I could say, yeah, they made mistakes. And I'm going to distance myself because it's not healthy for me to be around people who are going to say, oh, you don't want me, like, for example, you don't want me to smack your butt. And I'm like, no, Dad, I don't want you to do that. I think that's very uncomfortable. And he's like, well, I'm your father. I can do whatever I want to your body. And I'm like, no. So for me, I needed to have these healthy boundaries. So I needed to move my parents out of my life. And there was a lot of judgment that came from that from a lot of different people. And let me tell you that was not the extreme of their abuse. That was just the start of it. That wasn't just here's a little bit and that was everything that happened. Like that was just the beginning of like no respect for my own body. And then there was the manipulation and the spiritual abuse and the physical abuse and the mental abuse and emotional abuse and all of the things. And people just were like, oh, you have to love your parents. And I'm like, I respect who they are, that they are people. I don't respect them as people. Like I don't respect them as an authority figure of my life, but I respect that they are humans made in God's image. Okay, then that's it. Like when I see them, I'm not going to spend time with them. When I walk into a room and I see both of them standing there, I'm walking the other direction. I do not need to have a relationship with someone who has hurt me. And I want you to hear that. Like there is a difference between someone who wants you to, let me rephrase that. There is a difference between a person who is actively seeking forgiveness and change in their life to say, I'm sorry to you, but also like, I am trying to change these actions and not just for a tiny bit of time, but like I am actively pursuing to make sure I don't F this up again. Sorry for that, but it's true. And then there's people who are just like, I know that I'm sorry is a good word to use. And I know that if I slap Jesus on it, people will understand that I'm sorry. But I'm not changing. not going to change how I think. I'm not going to change what I'm doing. I'm going to slap sorry on there. And then today at 2 o'clock, I'm going to do the exact same thing I've been doing for the last 50, 60 years. And I think that is what makes healing so hard. Is that often when you want this conversation to say, hey, you hurt me and this is not okay, you're often receiving I don't care what you feel or think. You don't get those feelings. You don't get those thoughts. And that was how I was raised. So when healing is hurting you in this way, where you're trying to get healing and you're unable to get people in your life that have hurt you to kind of sit in that ugly conversation, it's not worth trying to pursue when bringing that other person in. But what you should continue to pursue is just going to counseling by yourself to deal with it. And then what tends to happen with healing too, and this is a really hard part of healing, is that you start to realize there are things that you do know and things that you did not know. That is very surprising. And what tends to happen is the people around you, when you're like, I'm just going to be honest. For example, I had made a report on somebody and I found out about 10 years later that report was thrown out the door and that they never pursued it, and that my report looks like it never existed. So to me as a victim, that was heartbreaking and really difficult to deal with, because it was like, what was the point of going and saying this person did this, and reliving everything to tell them what I went, and I had to give all these details and had to be examined and put in interviews and all of this stuff for them just to throw it away. And I realized that there are times that we go through these healings, these processes to help us be able to function emotionally and mentally in our everyday life. And there's other people on the other side who are just like, well, you don't know the whole story or whatever. And it's almost like there's this clash or collision of people who knew some things and then your story. And then it's hard. Like let me explain this in a better way. So I think of Britney Spears. And typically I'm not one who's like, hey, let's bring something new into the situation. I like talking about psychology from a general perspective and using stories that have been around for a while. But I think of her story because here's what's happening right now. So her conservatorship ended. We know that, which honestly, I'm like, thank the Lord, because there is this abuse that has been happening to her for decades. And it happened even before that. And that's what people don't realize. It wasn't just the time that she was in this conservatorship that this brokenness and this abuse has happened. It's been her whole life. And she's right now in a position where she is cutting ties off with people. She's like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. I want people to be scared of me. And honestly, I'm like, girl, I get it. Because she's just freshly out of being held captive. And here's the hard part, is that there are going to be a lot of people in her life that is like, Brittany, you didn't know how I felt for you. You didn't know this. You didn't know that. You weren't in those conversations. Or like, I saw something on she had posted something, and then someone like tweeted that they were her dancer, and they were like, we invited you. You don't even know. And I'm like, to her, she was told a totally different reality. Like, if someone's saying like, I was literally told that no, like you guys would go out to these parties and stuff. She was never said like, hey, Brittany, you were invited, you can't go. What she was told was, Brittany, they used you. You think I'm using you? You think those dancers are your friends? No, honey. Like, let me tell you the truth. And when you're in that kind of an environment with those kind of toxic people, you just cut everybody off because you're just like, I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to trust. And that's part of healing that's really hard, is that you don't know who to trust. And there's oftentimes you don't even trust your counselor. I know for myself, I actually found out the counselor I was seeing when I was 13 was telling my parents everything I was telling them. So guess what happened when I got home? So I had a hard time trusting the counselor that I was with, because I was like, look, I haven't had a good relationship with a counselor before. And they would tell people, they would go and tell people, not just parents, but people. And people were like, oh yeah, you're seeing so-and-so. And she told me blah, 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 blah. And there was no confidentiality with this person. And so with a situation like Brittany, where she's finally coming into this place of like, I'm going to get healing, I'm going to get moved on, I'm going to take control out of my life, because she's been abused for so long, she's going to cut ties with people, and people cannot get offended by what she's doing. In the sense, now let me rephrase that. So she shouldn't be treating people like crap, but if she's like, I'm sorry, I'm cutting ties with you, like, you kind of have to respect it, just to be like, you know what? She will one day learn that I was on her side. And it's not easy, but when you have been abused for so long, you literally don't know who to trust. And the people you thought you could trust are the people who were super, super shady. And it's like, that's why I think like, she's just like, I'm done. Like, I'm done with people. I want to be normal. I don't want to deal with this. And I want to be in full control of my life. And I just don't trust anything anybody says anymore. And I'm pretty sure she has said those things verbatim. And so when you're going through this healing process, that could also happen, where you're just like, no, bye-bye. Like, we're not dealing with this. And so healing hurts because you have the issue where you're having to dig in through things alone. And oftentimes, if you do bring someone else into the picture, there is that back and forth, like, argument of like, no, that's not what happened. This is the real story. This is the real perspective. Like, you don't even know. I don't know how many times my parents would say that. Like, you didn't know the full situation. And so I'd ask them, I'm like, so tell me why did you beat me then? You know, and the answer was always like, well, I was really stressed out. Not something like, okay, the reason we stopped hanging out with so-and-so was because this is what this person was saying. It was never something like that. Like, this person was asking for a raise multiple times and then saying that they were going to leak photos of you. So we decided to cut this person out of your life, Brittany. Like, it wasn't a situation like that. It's just like, everyone's like, well, girl, we were behind you and we supported you. We just didn't know. And it's like, but you have to realize, like, in her abuse, and this is where the healing is hard, is that like, you have to decipher what is reality and what is perspective and what is false. And then you have to go through every conversation, every situation that you've ever been through and say, did I read that right? Or am I wrong? Did that really happen to me? Or did it not? So healing hurts because you're often alone, and you're often having to dig through things again to try to understand why you're reacting the way you are. And I mean, triggers are a hard thing because triggers can take you emotionally back to where you were, or mentally back to what happened to you. And sometimes, you know, I feel like people kind of throw that word around like, I love you. Like, I love burgers, I love people, I love this building. Like, that's how I feel like people throw the word triggers around. But when I think of triggers, I think of triggers being what draws you back to your hurt. It may be someone's grabbing your arm a certain way, and then suddenly you would start remembering when you were sexually assaulted. Like, that's a trigger to me. And I think in counseling, those same triggers can happen, is that when we are talking about what we have been through, it's not like, hey, yeah, I went through this. Like, you're bawling most of the time, or you're really just emotionally hurting. And you often, honestly, sometimes you do leave counseling feeling like crap. And you're just like, how is this better? Like, how is this better than throwing it off to the side? And I'm going to tell you, it does not feel good for a couple of months to like a year of dealing with stuff. But when you're able to analyze what's happening and logically think through what the situation in front of you is happening, and you realize like, wow, I've come a long way from who I was and how I thought and how I felt, like, that thing still hurts me, but it doesn't hold me. That's not my identity. You know, yes, I have been a victim of sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse. I don't have parents. Those things don't define me. Those happened, but I'm Denisha. I am not those things. And I think that is a hard thing in our society right now, is that we are all looking for a label. We are all looking for an identity, that we have often used our trauma as our identity versus our of knowing who we are. And if we're in hurt and pain for so long, other things tend to happen. A lot of the times when we're looking for this place to be, these people to be accepted by, or this place in our life we just want to find happiness, we often miss it because we didn't want to dig into the crap to get to the healing. So that is why healing hurts, is because we are often doing it alone, and we're having to dig through the messy and work through the messy before it ever gets better. But I want to encourage you, and I will always say this, is find the right counselor. I know I have had moments with counselors that were really great, and then I've had some not so great counselors. Find someone, not someone who's going to affirm everything that you believe, but someone who can help challenge you, but is respectful to you. If your counselor is disrespectful, like, find somebody else. If your counselor is just like, yeah, whatever you want, like, you want me to tell you that you're amazing and you want me to tell you you're a piece of crap, I'll tell you whatever you want. Like, that's not a good counselor. That's not a good counselor at all. But you do want to find someone who can challenge you a little bit and help you grow into a better you. Because I think the hard part about healing is first taking the couple steps to start actually digging in. The hardest step is not finding a counselor and going. It's actually digging in and saying, I'm going to keep digging into this so that way I can get better. So I'm a better me tomorrow than I am today. And really working on those things. But next week, we're going to be digging into a different topic. If you guys have questions, put them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next week. Have a great day.